I started in college hosting these dinner parties. My friend was coming to town. I wanted to meet all my friends. Most of them didn't know each other. It just was magical. And I didn't have to be the social organizer at all. Just everyone in the room. It was the right mix of people. And then I started hosting these salon dinners.
Is there some secret sauce to being able to put that together for yourself?
The first salon dinner we hosted, no one showed up. My friend and I were we made this big meal and we were and I remember being really kind of sad. And my friend was okay, I'll just call a couple other people. Whatever, we'll just do it. And so I think accepting that it doesn't need to be perfect. The first one might be super awkward. It might be the wrong people. It might be the wrong topic, the wrong format, whatever. You just keep, if it's something you really want, you just keep kind of going after it.
This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Derek Larson. So Derek was referred to me by both Jeff Lee and Dmitry Merikayan, who have both been guests on the show already. So I just had to have him on. So Derek is the founder of New York AI, which is an exclusive community for founders and engineers building AI products in New York City. He also has founded Kin, which is a company that builds tools to facilitate this community building. So today we talk about how he was able to create such a productive and value-driven community in the data and AI space. We'll also talk about what he's learned from working with so many people who are building companies, some of the do's and do nots of creating a startup related to data and AI. Finally, we're going to talk about how the centralization versus open source battle will play out in AI. I hope you enjoy this episode. I really enjoyed talking with Derek. Derek, welcome to the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast.
It is a pleasure.
Yeah, of course. We got introduced, friend of a friend. You know both Jeff Lee and Dmitry, who have been previous guests on the podcast. You came highly recommended from them, so had to have you on. And I'm excited to learn about all the stuff you're working on, the community building, and just how you got to where you are. So welcome again.
Awesome. Excited to chat.
So the way we love to start things off here is to learn a little bit about how you first got interested in data. So was there maybe a pivotal moment that sparked this interest, or has it been more of a slow progression over time for you?
So definitely a pivotal moment. So at Northwestern, I've been studying math and just enjoying doing that. And I started doing some programming on the side and was working on some different business ideas. And then I'd taken a year off after my junior year of college to move to San Francisco. And my roommate is just this wild quant hedge fund guy, and he was running all these algorithms on these massive computers in our apartment, and he was just showing me of this Python code is automating this reasoning about how to trade on the FX market, and it was doing better than he could do manually. And I was this is so cool. And him and I started hacking on some different projects. And I think I saw, at the time I would have been okay, now I'm going to be a data scientist. That's a trajectory. And I realized pretty fast that okay, these data challenges are super interesting. And then then the interest kind of went into NLP and okay, understanding language is such a fascinating thing that computers can do. And this was in 2019. Then GPT-3 came out and it was oh my gosh, this is crazy. This is so crazy. And fast forward a couple of years, and I had been working at some different startups in ML kind of engineering roles. And when I'd moved to New York, and the tech scene was not super in your face like it is in San Francisco. And I really wanted to hang out with more cool people doing ML research and building products. And so I just spun up a brand and said put your flag in the ground, this is New York AI, and invited, just started sending out cold emails to people about do you want to come to this event we're hosting? A super official looking group, and people just loved it. This is just immediately kind of at the end of the event, there's 3 or 4 people who are okay, are we going to do this every week? Or every month? What? what's going to happen here? And that just kind of slowly built up to just hosting more events. And right now we're kind of focused on, we have all these people that are kind of sharing what they're interested in, sharing how they want to get plugged in. Like, how can we use language models to make sense of all that information, and allow me to do the thing that one of the things I like doing most, which is just connecting people and like bringing people together.
What does a normal event like that look like? If I show up, what's the story there?
There are a couple different like formats. So one is, we've done some like co-working sessions, just like cool people in a room working on stuff, kind of mix of social and hacking. And I think that like the bread and butter is like, okay, there are 30 of the people I think are doing the most interesting work that I know of in the ML space. And you show up in the room, I escort you around of like, these are the people you should meet, introduce you. And that's just like so much fun when you get the right people in. It's just so magical. And then we've done some like really big talks of like, okay, let's get like a really interesting person that like runs, like one of our first talks was like the head of ML at Bloomberg, and like, let's interview him, talk about what's happening, different startup founders. So
that's badass. And so what's the biggest thing that you've learned from this process, maybe about the community? Because I feel like a lot of people have these maybe misconceptions about what it means to show up at an event, what it means to be a part of a community, what it means to learn from these other people. They either don't feel like they're qualified, or they feel like they don't fit in, or they have to be invited. What is the biggest takeaway you've had?
So one is, I think just the relevancy and like quality of the people is like the most important thing I think you can do. And you get a couple people that like are just not on the same wavelength, and it's just kind of like a wrench in in the whole system. And I think that's like really underestimated, like the power of curation with people that kind of run these groups. I think that a lot of communities get worse as they scale, as a general rule. It's like, okay, it's magical when there's 20 people in a room. Like, you have a small group chat and it's super cool, and then it gets bigger and it gets bigger and bigger, and then people like are not as willing to share in kind of any online format. And I think the events get worse with like the more people you get in a room. Like, it just becomes super chaotic and overwhelming for people. And there's just kind of like this paradox of choice when you walk in the room of like, who do I talk to?
How do you avoid that scaling problem in what you've built?
I really think that like one-on-one conversations is how you enable that, and using the information that people are sharing with us about who they want to connect with, and just like making tons of introductions, basically. And then the like small group events are kind of still something we do just because it's fun. And yeah.
So are the events, and are they invite only, or is it that, hey, first come, first serve, 30 people, cap it at that, whatever it might be?
Definitely invite only. Yeah. I mean, most of the events we don't publicize anywhere. Just like I text people, like I email them.
Yeah. So it's sort of like almost like a mastermind, in the sense where, hey, you guys are going to come together, and maybe not in the same format where everyone's talking to everyone around a big table or something along those lines.
Yes.
But And so what have you seen in terms of results perspective? So what is coming out of these meetings? Obviously the relationships, are there products being built, everything along those lines, or what's the outcome?
So I mean, so what's really exciting to me is when this just happens over and over again, of like people saying like, oh yeah, like I was hanging out with so-and-so I met at the event, or like the other night, I bumped into someone and they said like, oh yeah, since the event you did like a month ago, I've met up with so-and-so like 3 times. I'm like, wow, like, okay, that's, and he's like, it's the coolest person I know, and like all this stuff. And yeah, seeing like people invest in each other's companies, people like become co-founders or find a role with an interesting company. Like, I think those are all like kind of metrics.
So let's say I'm someone who wants to join a community like this, be a part of something like that. What are the qualifications? What are the things that I would need to be able to do or showcase to be able to be a contributing member, to be able to make an impact there, and to add value in that type of sense?
Yeah. So I think some of it is just like, do I find what they're doing interesting? Which is like not helpful. It's like a instruction at all. But like that's the best metric I know of how to make a cool event is, am I interested in what people are doing? If so, it's very likely they're going to get along.
That makes total sense. No, I love it. So have you always been a community builder, or is it more like this is something that you just saw the opportunity for after you were sort of deeply steeped in the space?
So it was always the thing. It started in college, and it was a thing that I didn't think of as a skill, or I didn't think of as like a career or anything you would do. It was just like what I was doing for fun. And so I started in college hosting these dinner parties. And the first one was super random. Like my friend was coming to town. I wanted to meet all my friends. Most of them didn't know each other. So it was like, how do I get everyone, like, how do I help my friends meet a bunch of my friends? And so I just threw a dinner party, and it just was magical. It just was like, and I didn't have to like be the social like organizer at all. Just like everyone in the room, it was the right mix of people. And it was similar of like, okay, are you going to do these? How often are you going to do these? Like, this was so fun. And then I started hosting these like salon dinners, where we'd pick some topic, often some like personal or like philosophical question. And then what you're saying about the mastermind group, like 8 to 12 people in a room for like 3 hours. We'd go around, share our thoughts on it, and kind of like open it up for a discussion, like single threaded, in the group. That was just super cool. Yeah.
I love that. Well, I mean, we share some common ground on that front. I mean, that's something I've been doing for a while in the maybe YouTube content creator data space, where hosted a couple events and these types of things. A lot of my friends come, we get to catch up and talk and work on problems and learn from each other. And those have been some of the most meaningful catalysts for progression in the content that I produce, or the stories, or my process around all of these things. And I absolutely love that. I think that the majority of the growth that I've had isn't from me just going in a room and studying and trying to learn about a field.
Yeah.
It's asking people who are deeply immersed in it in different ways and trying to pick up little tidbits here and there. This episode of Ken's Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z8 workstation. I really love that the Z workstations can come standard with Linux or WSL2, and they can be configured with the Data Science Software Stack Manager. With the Software Stack Manager, you can get right to the work of doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show. So is there some secret sauce to being able to put that together for yourself? I mean, something I recommend almost everyone is find a study group, find people who are around your level where you can push each other. Is there, you mentioned that it is a skill, but are there aspects of that skill that are maybe replicable if someone is, in college and they want to find people they're working on similar problems to them?
So, I mean, I think that one, I've always found putting a brand on it. I think there are multiple ways to go, but like I always found that as a really effective way to go about it, because it just feels more like official, like you're joining New York AI versus you're like joining some event that a person is hosting. And I think it gives a really easy path to just like send a bunch of emails out to people you think are interesting. And you're creating all this value by getting like a really good group together. So that's one path. And I think just taking the initiative, and like the first salon dinner we hosted, no one showed up. Like my friend and I were like, okay, there's like 3 of us, and then each person invited a friend. And then the rule is then they have to bring the most interesting person they know on campus to the event. And all 3 of them canceled last minute. And so we made this big meal, and we were like, and I remember being like really like kind of sad. And their friend was like, okay, I'll just call a couple other people, whatever. Like we'll just do it. And so I think accepting that it doesn't need to be perfect. The first one might be super awkward. It might be the wrong people. It might be the wrong topic, the wrong format, whatever. Like you just keep, if it's something you really want, you just keep kind of going after it.
Yeah, I think word of mouth is one of the most effective ways. If they're your friends, I mean, hopefully your friends also have friends.
Yes. Yeah.
People
exactly.
generally aggregate around similar things and interests. I mean, you never know. I mean,
you never know. Yeah. And then I think you just find, like I've really found in New York just how like tight knit and small AI community is. And it's always just so interesting with like who knows who. And
is there anything that sort of surprised you about that process of growing?
I mean, one thing that comes to mind is I think a failure mode a lot of people fall into is they do the same like the same type of event in the same format over and over and over again, and I think that it just gets dull for people, and especially if they're not very well curated, like it just kind of like a not a great way to go. But how I think about it is just like try a bunch of stuff and just like make it fun. Like what is New York AI going to do next? Is kind of like how I think about this. Yeah.
Amazing. And so if I recall, you're doing New York AI essentially full time now, and you're working on some other projects as well.
Yeah. So yeah, it's like New York AI is kind of the labor of love and the project that I've had so much fun with. And then Kin is kind of like my other company. And we just want to like build tools that I want to use for New York AI. And then start a bunch of other networks using those tools. Just like create a brand, find someone that can be kind of the social connector of the group, have all these tools, start all these other kind of networks like this.
So that seems to be underlying a prevailing mindset shift in startups in the AI space. Can you talk a little bit about how that's changed maybe since the advent of GPT-4 and some of these large language models and this massive competition to have the biggest and best and most impressive LLMs?
For sure. I mean, yeah, I think the ML versus AI is such an interesting thing that I don't think is talked about, like how big of a mindset shift that was. And yeah, with the ML world, it felt like it was more run by researchers, and it was like the mindset is like, okay, do you have the data? Like that was the question. Okay, you need to get the data first, and then it needs to be clean and it needs to be good, and then you can like train this model that does something super specific, and then hopefully implement that. And I think that was there's just like a lot of dead companies, and part of why I think like there's a lot of investors that kind of were kicking themselves at like they thought the space was dead because it's like they just seen so many like deep learning ML branded companies that just did not amount to much. And then with like language models becoming the thing, and also like the generative image models, it became like, okay, the data's not that important. Like it's like the data is more what can you get to fit into the context of the language model, and how like unique is that, and how much value can you create by getting that information and then using a language model to make sense of it in some way. Yeah, and I also think it's just like quicksand right now. Like there's so many companies that it's like you just get steamrolled by OpenAI and just eating everything in their path. So I would be very, I think, hesitant around a lot of AI companies right now in terms of joining them, or starting them for that matter.
How do you feel about centralization of a lot of these large language models, a lot of the data around these large language models? It seems like what you were describing with ML roles or some of the more traditional deep learning models that are not large language models, everything was essentially built in public, was open source. And hey, we're going to take some of this open source and we're going to refine it with our specific data. And that's where the secret sauce is. And then now it's sort of like, well, the models are very largely closed off from these large companies, except for maybe like Llama. But some of the tooling is largely open source, and it seems like a pretty big paradigm shift.
Yes, I agree with that. But I think that ML has always been about centralization, because there's like even in that like the tools were maybe more open source, but you still are. The idea is like this one model rules them all. For every fraud decision, the ideal would be the model would make that decision, and instead of humans. And with language models, I think it's slightly different, where it's more like the model is for everyone. Like it's not you're training this one model to do everything internally at a company. It's more like everyone's going to use OpenAI, kind of a vibe. Which I mean, there are a lot of downsides with that in terms of cost and data privacy, which is like it's a whole other question of like how successful, like how much do people actually care about that? I know people like the Apple um, announcement yesterday of like integrating ChatGPT into some of the iPhone features. Um, it's like, I don't know, do we trust OpenAI? I don't know. Should we? I
That's
don't
a
know.
very good
They've
question.
got a lot of data. But I think we trust a lot of these other big companies of like everything's going through AWS.
Yeah, I mean, are companies doing themselves a massive disservice? I mean, think of Google right now with all of the essentially AI integrated search, where you type in something and there's all these crazy things like, oh, if you want to get the cheese to stay on pizza, you should glue it, because they're taking
Yeah,
data from Reddit and it's not super refined. Is that? I mean, to me, and I haven't been completely immersed in this battle, but it seems like a Google is losing when they're making when they're releasing things before they're ready and they're not polished, just to build like how they used to. I mean, something that if we think about uh, software development lifecycle and parallelization and building things incrementally, it seems like that's not really good enough anymore, which is kind of surprising.
yeah. Well, I think it's also about expectation setting, and I think you just expect something different from Google. I mean, when ChatGPT came out, there's just all this bad publicity about stupid stuff it was saying and like offensive stuff, and I think that Google's problem. Yeah, my thought on this is like why they didn't use the DeepMind brand more to take some of that like reputation hit of like keep Google more pure, where it's like it's saying the right thing. It's and because ChatGPT like they can get away with it, like where I think Google, yeah, this is what they're afraid of. They're acting out of fear. It's coming true. Like,
Yeah, their greatest fears have been realized over
yeah,
and
yeah,
over again in this
yes,
AI
yes,
saga.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
I also think maybe it's different in the new landscape of technology, where they're not the only ones with a product. I mean, Google used to be in the other position, right, where they have uh, the preeminent search engine, and overall, it's pretty good. All of the up and coming people, it's not as polished and refined as Google. And usually, again, Google and Facebook have always done things incrementally. It's kind of the way of those businesses. But when you do things incrementally, and there's a company, let's take a phone for example. There's a company like Apple, and everything runs very smoothly. It's a finished product when it comes out. Yes, you have to refine it. I mean, that's probably one of the issues with the Vision Pro, but it seems like it's great if you're doing something new to be able to work iteratively. And OpenAI could do that when they have the first mover advantage. But if you're trying to catch up to someone, you actually have to release a final product rather than iterating. And to me, that's very backwards from how we usually look at engineering to begin with.
yes, yeah, no. And I think it's just the like the reality of language models where like they're just hallucination machines. Like people call it hallucination when it's bad, but like the whole thing is hallucination. They're just making stuff up, like which you could argue that's what we're doing as humans, just like next word prediction in our head. Um, but
Well, I mean, if you think about hallucinations, I mean, that's exactly how humans are. I mean, we misremember facts. We say things because we think they'll sound good rather than them being necessarily accurate. I mean, maybe they're better approximations of who we are than we
yes,
even thought to begin with.
yeah, yeah, and it's definitely true of like the like all this training data that like it just reshapes your thoughts, like whatever you read, all the conversations you have, like it just bubbles back up, and you don't have control over like what's coming up in terms of your thoughts.
That's very true. And so you'd mentioned earlier that you'd be hesitant to work for or get too involved with some of the new AI companies coming up. I mean, obviously, I think GPT is doing something really interesting in the sense that they have the plugins and they're collecting all this data. And then what stops them from just doing one of the plugins themselves? It's very, very, very interesting.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think that's a great point because the plugins don't make any sense in my view. Because it's like the whole point is that you have this one text box. It's one thing you ask the questions. And so I think they're just getting lots of good training data, basically, of like, what do people want to use? What should we get more data on? How are people reacting to the responses that the plugins are putting out?
And that also gives them some of that plausible deniability, like what you were saying with DeepMind too, right? And for the audience listening, that was Derek's idea. I stole that from our previous conversation. That his, but I'll cut this part. No, I was kidding. but so do other companies operating in this space? Do they have a chance? Is there, does something like even an Anthropic have the resources or the ability to compete? Because to me, it's a little bit hard to look at how far ahead OpenAI is, especially with things like Lambda coming out. Each new release is just unbelievable, right?
Yes, for sure. And I think they're really far on like the product understanding as well. So, like you just talk about the model quality, but in terms of what they're doing with voice, in terms of like, okay, let's get a Mac app and like it's going to do X, Y, and Z things. We're going to integrate with Apple. Like that is such a massive win. And I think it's like, okay, if the models get commoditized, it's about the product at the end of the day, and like how integrated can you get with people's lives. But like when I have a question, I don't think like, okay, go to Claude to ask it. Like it's ChatGPT is just a default.
Do you think that there is a chance that the models do eventually get commoditized? I mean, what is the downstream look like, you think?
Yeah, no, I think it's a question a lot of people are asking, and I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. Like to me, it feels like OpenAI is going to stay ahead. It's like they just have such brilliant researchers and have a lot of data as well of how people are using ChatGPT. So yeah, but the open source models will just keep getting better. And I think we'll have use cases that are interesting that I think are hard to think about right now. But it could be just that everyone goes to the cloud. Like I think a lot of people are talking like, oh, like it's going to be local on your phone, and that will be a big moment once we can have like a good model that I don't even know what that means. Like what a good model means anymore. Yeah, good enough. Good enough where people are happy with it. Not Siri, like not that type of experience. It could be that people are okay with just sending the data to the cloud.
To me, that's the way the trend is going with almost everything now. I mean, I was on a phone the other day and I was like, oh, like I didn't even realize this app needs wireless connectivity. Like who would have thought that would be an important thing for whatever random photo app or whatever it is that I was trying to look at
yes.
when I was bored at 30,000 feet. But so, I mean, you mentioned obviously open source. What do you think the future of that is? I mean, I listened to, it was a Joe Rogan episode with Jeremy and Eduardo Harris, and I've had Jeremy on the show, which was pretty cool. And they were talking about how, essentially a lot of information, a lot of advancements outside of the US is happening because of Llama 3 and then China just hacking people. is that the future of how we get like stuff in open source? Is someone hacks it and gets it out there and then it's released? I mean, it's not completely impossible, right?
No, it's not. That's not an unreasonable guess, which I think is part of why some of the companies are not releasing a lot of the research anymore. And it's also a question of like, is that a bad thing? Like, I don't know. Yeah, but I think there definitely are use cases where it just is going to be too expensive to run things through OpenAI or Anthropic. And also there's a reliability question. Like there's a friend of mine that had chosen, this is before like Claude 3 had come out, but they specifically chosen Anthropic because less people were using it, unless it was like more reliable than ChatGPT, which has just such like that API has such crazy usage. They would go down, and like that just was like not reasonable for the product. It had to work a very large portion of the time.
Well, I mean, you got me thinking on single point of failure. This is very embarrassing for me to say, but I was coding the other day, and I don't really code as much as I used to, and like my chat GPT wasn't working for some reason, and I just gave up rather than trying to force through it. And I was like, oh man, like that's not good. But I was like, well, I could spend an hour now when I could do this in 15 minutes when it's up, and I could just focus that hour on doing something else. I mean, to me, that's one. It's concerning for my own personal behavior, but it's also concerning from like maybe a company perspective, huh?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think one good hack is to have a backup plan using the API. So I use Raycast, which is just a phenomenal tool as like a spotlight alternative, and you can just use an API key, just interact with it like you would in the browser. And so that has happened to me where the web version doesn't work, and so I just switch to using the API, and it still works. Yeah,
that is smart, very wise. Well, so you're just talking about a tool you're using. Can you tell me a little bit more about the tools you're building for the community? That to me is always fascinating. Like, what are you building?
Yes, for sure. So, as I think I was describing earlier, of like, I want to be able to make more of these connections, and like the amount that the human brain can hold, specifically about people. I think we're not very good at keeping a lot of context about people in mind, and especially when it gets to like thousands, like keeping in mind what their vibe is, like what they're looking for, like who they've enjoyed talking to in the past. Like that's all super interesting data to use to like make these suggestions. And so I basically just want to scale and like productize myself as the kind of social connector. And so, yeah, just like language models are really, really good. And just like more like embedding models in general of like, okay, we have 1,000 people, let's say, and we filter it to 10, and then there's like the language model is a pass, and then I'm a pass at the end of like, this makes sense. Like hit a button, connect the people with like super rich context, like you would get in like when Jeff introduced us, of like super relevant on both sides and like really thoughtful message, and like how can we create that? Because I think that is just such a valuable thing for people, and so yeah, with these networks, like just how can be a resource where someone has the thought, I'm looking for an advisor that has experience with this super specific thing. Who do you know? And they can just get connected with that person.
So what type of data goes into a model like that? I mean, obviously you're using some sort of LLM, but like what type of things you collect? Is it just LinkedIn profiles, or does everyone who comes in fill out a survey or write some stuff about themselves?
Basically, yeah. People are like writing about themselves, what they're excited about, what they want help with, what they are excited to help other people with, which is just, it's always surprising to me that like a lot of this stuff is nowhere else. Like it's not online. Like, cause you're not, like the stuff you put on your LinkedIn is just so performative and not necessarily relevant to like what's actually on your mind. Yeah. Now we found LinkedIn data is not that helpful. Like it's just really low signal to noise. Yeah.
And so, obviously you're meeting really interesting people pretty much every week, all the time. Are there any products, platforms, concepts that you're just super excited about that you're seeing in real time get built here?
Yep, for sure. So yeah, Raycast has like replaced all of my ChatGPT web usage basically. And it's also it's like so cheap when you just pay the API cost as well. Like I think I pay like, I don't know, $4 a month or something, based on usage in comparison to like 20. And you have to go to the website, versus just like pulling it up with like one keystroke basically, and then typing in what you're looking for. And yeah, we were talking before the call about Cursor. Like I just love Cursor. Like it is such a phenomenal tool. It makes me think like, why would anyone want to use VS Code anymore? Because what they did is just like fork VS Code. So there's no like switch needed. Because that is such a heavy lift to get someone to move off of like the IDE they're used
Yeah,
to.
and all the plugins and stuff still work the same, I
Yeah,
assume.
everything works. Everything works the same, and it's just like a one-click import all the plugins. Like it's just fantastic. Which maybe Microsoft will catch up and integrate those features, but I don't know. I'm betting on the little guy, the little guy standing on top of the shoulders of giants.
Yeah, I'm gonna legitimately download that immediately after this podcast ends because it looks very interesting. I mean, fortunately, again, I was saying I don't code as much as I used to anymore, but I have a lot coming up that I'm gonna have to do. So it'll be fun to be able to experiment with some new cool tools and things like that. And what does your process look like for building stuff these days? So those are the two of the tools you're using pretty heavily. Are you getting a lot of just information feedback from the community? You're building it for them, and
Yes,
they're iterating
yes,
on it in that sense.
yeah. And then you're seeing that makes it so like enjoyable and exciting to see people using it, and just be able to iterate super fast because like you control all of the whole process. For a while, we were thinking about like, okay, this is a tool we're going to like partner with other communities on, and it just is messy. It's messy when you're trying to integrate with other people's systems. You're trying to like all the social dynamics to go into it. Where it's great to just be like, we can do anything. there's nothing off limits when you control the whole, like you're vertically integrating like this. And that kind of led to the idea of like, let's just start more of these networks. Just find cool people, partner with them, run it. And my hunch is it's going to scale really well.
Yeah.
And
Are you looking for
magical.
mostly engineering communities to continue to build with, or something along those lines, or what does that look
I
like?
don't know. I don't know. Like that's an open question of like who's going to get. I think the people I understand the most are engineers and founders, and so I think it'll make sense to like keep going down that path. And I think there's also something magical about tech. I think it's so expansive, and people are so willing to help each other. And I think in there are a lot of other domains where that's not, like finance, real
Definitely not
estate.
finance. Yes.
It's you don't want to share the secrets until after you finish you finish the deal. Then you're like, but it's like you can't really copy it because you already bought the company, kind of a deal.
Well, we should talk more offline because that'd be very interesting. I'd love to do something like that with podcasting in Austin. I think that would be a lot of fun. There's a lot of
Interesting,
people in that
interesting.
niche. There is something a little, I wouldn't say different in the content space, but so, engineers generally all respect each other. There's no hierarchy necessarily of engineering where it's like, oh, this person is so far out of my league. But when you have content and there's numbers next to your name in terms of followers and viewership, it's like, oh, those people aren't worth talking to because they don't have XYZ number next to their name. And
Yes,
to me, that's it's a sad thing. It's something why I always still have a foot in engineering and data science. I mean, I also work in the domain, but I wonder if there's an AI solution to figure out how um, people can still be useful to other people in spite of following differences or things along those lines. But that's probably a very, very deeply nuanced answer. So
yeah, it is. It is because it's. I think it's also how many types of problem statements there are for people, and if a lot of it will just be like partnerships, like you want to meet people to like partner on content, be on each other's podcasts, then that becomes, I think, less of a need. Where I think in like the tech and startup space, it could be anything. It's just so random and so niche what people are looking for. And so I think this like matching problem is a lot more difficult.
interesting. So, what is the future of the communities that you're building look like? Obviously, scaling to other things, but
Yeah.
trying to keep them small, or is it like, hey, we have 30 incredible people, but there's 600 incredible people in New York. Do we make mini cohorts for each one to be a part of, and there's some cross pollination, or is there like, hey, this is it, all the at capacity? Sorry, guys, if someone dies or gets taken over by AI, like like next person's
there's
in.
there's someone that pitched me on this idea last week of it was just like, let's have a set number of people. The number was like 86. Let's have 86 people in New York that are doing interesting stuff and no more. And like if someone leaves, we can find a new person, and like get like a clubhouse and like make it make it a whole thing. I think it's an interesting model. Like I think that could be interesting of like the scarcity element, which is how like country clubs work. So they don't have a great reputation.
Why 86?
I don't know. It's just for fun. Yeah,
it's exactly 86.
Maybe
I
they
didn't
could
know
get
if there
the
was like
domain.
a
I don't know what
86engineers.com.
Yep. I think
I
smaller
thought it was
would be
going to be
better.
some weird significance of, I mean, like Dunbar's number or something along those lines. Interesting.
I think it's both. I think that's how I'm thinking about it right now. I also want to do more small groups, basically, and I think the same kind of tech enables that. Like, okay, how do we take what's in my brain of how do you get 30 people in a room that are really cohesive and are going to like each other, and do that more times without my brain having to like sift through the list of people and be like, these are the people that are going to be relevant to each other.
And so are you doing this essentially all by yourself in AI, or do you have help? And
Oh no, I'm doing
scaling?
everything. It's totally nuts. The context switching is crazy. Yeah, which we could go into like habits around that all
No,
day. I'm
yeah, let's
sure.
do it. I mean,
Yeah,
because part of me is like AI is incredible, but an executive assistant could like probably crush some element of what you do. And we both know how good Dimitri is at outsourcing labor to humans compared to compared to AIs. I guess both, but I'm interested in like what's your philosophy on all that stuff.
yeah, for sure. So I think that a lot of founders underestimate how complex managing people is. And it's like, okay, you go from one person, you have no social dynamics, right? It's just you. You go to two people and there's one relationship you have to manage. You go to three people and all of a sudden you have three. And just like grows geometrically, of just like more of these that you all have to get everyone on the same page and they have to get along. And this is maybe one of the things I'm most excited about with AI is being able to have less of that kind of drag on.
I've never thought about the exponential nature of network effect in an organization. Holy cow, that's crazy. That's like it's not just like linearly you add one more person and there's only one increment of dynamics. It's that cross pollination of all these people. Holy cow, that's very foreign to me. And so yeah, so AI you don't currently have to manage the interpersonal dynamics.
Yes, yeah, no, for sure. But I think that there is what I found is that it is really helpful to have like some of that conflict. I think is not the right word, but like there's a push and pull dynamic between you have a designer and you have an engineer, and they're both trying to pull for something specific, and like you kind of get them to meet in the middle. Where if it's one person, that gets kind of like it gets mushy.
Dictatorship.
Of like, okay, am I making this decision because it's easy to build, or am I making this decision because the product needs it, the community needs it, and so yeah, and I think outside voices are very helpful in like working through that for me personally.
So is that an argument for also for AI agents at some point, rather than just one model having multiple that are doing different functions?
Yeah, no,
Because
I
you,
think,
in
and I
theory,
think
could create.
and I think it depends on like how much are the agents going to be pushing back on you versus right now they just do whatever you say for the most part. It's like you still need to be the conductor, where humans are not like that. They come up with new ideas and like pick up on a lot of things. So I'm hopeful that will be the case. That it'll be able to say, you're completely thinking about this in the wrong way. And that was the wrong question. And this is how you should be thinking about it. And like, I have X, Y, Z information to show you. But it's still, at the end of the day, will be one person's decision, which maybe that's, I mean, kind of how a lot of startups are just dictatorships. Like, I think that's important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you look at the benefits and drawbacks of dictatorships. They get stuff done.
They get so
and
fast.
it very efficiently, but you have a trade-off. It's like bias and variance, right? Where you have, it's like a lot of bias, low variance with the dictatorship, or it could potentially very high bias, low variance. And then you have the other trade-off with more of a democracy where it's like a wider spread, but usually around that center more. So very, very fascinating. Derek, should I have asked, are there any questions that I didn't ask that I should have asked?
It's a wonderful question. I think we got through a lot of interesting stuff. I feel like we could dig deeper on the question on a lot of people's mind is like defensibility and like what are going to be the startups that are endure and are not going to get steamrolled by OpenAI.
Who are those startups?
So I think a good framing is like I think this was like Sam Altman, direct from him, of like, are you betting on the model getting better and that helping you? The model gets better and like it just propels you forward versus you're like chasing. You're trying to like fine tune the model so you can be a little bit better than what's out there. So the product's a little bit better. And I think that's just like, this is not good. That's not a good place to be. And I think a lot of the dev tool stuff I think is really complicated because you just don't know like how the paradigm is going to shift with different models and different like okay, if OpenAI changes their like dev tooling, does that totally like throw your plans out the water? And like as well as like if Apple or Microsoft or Google could create the product and distribute it, like I think that would make me hesitant as a founder versus like I think there are a lot of things where it would make no sense for OpenAI to build something and I think that's why like a lot of the vertical kind of SaaS companies are getting a lot of hype right now.
Yeah, I've always found the trade-off of it. So if companies could build it or will they build it, very interesting. I mean, so we talked about on how I have the podcast reviewed is I send you a frame.io link. Frame.io is a company that literally any big technology company I think could have built, but they just didn't for some reason, and then they sold for $1 billion.
Yeah.
And to me, that's a very interesting thing is like, are there gaps in what these companies could build, but they would never build for some reason, just because they don't see utility or it would be there would be some overhead or some obstacle. And like, those are probably things that are also compelling is that, maybe they're not doing it for a good reason, but a lot of companies at that scale just might overlook some things and it's easier to buy rather than to build as well. So I don't necessarily know how that fits into the paradigm of chasing versus having something facilitate what you're doing, but it's also maybe an interesting consideration.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that it gets to the point of like, what do you want as the founder or someone that's joining the company? And like, there's a lot of space to have not $1 billion companies.
Yeah, you could have a lot of not $1 billion companies that add up to $1 billion too.
Yes.
I'm reading the book. It's called How to Make a Couple $1 billion or a few $1 billion right now. It's very interesting. I highly recommend it.
Okay.
He talks a lot about AI and innovation in that as well. I forget who the author is, but he's made a few $1 billion.
Yeah. Okay. That's important, right? to be able to write that book.
Very important credibility.
Yeah.
Derek, this is awesome. Where can people learn more about what you're doing? Where can they find out about you on the internet as well?
For sure. So if you're interested, getting plugged into New York AI, newyorkai.org. I think I'm not super active on Twitter, but we post updates there and on my LinkedIn as well. And kin.is, if someone is listening and they're getting super jazzed up about like, I want to start one of these networks and kind of use this playbook and this tech, I'd love to hear from you. So Yeah.
Heck yes, and I will probably be one of those people. I'll leave
Okay.
those links in the description and the show notes for anyone who's interested. Derek, again, this is so fun. Thank you so much for coming on.